How's it going, guys? My name's Noah, and I really like Lorcana. I've been anticipating the release for quite a while, basically since it was announced. I'm a huge Disney fan, but I'm also a huge fan of card games. Um, Played a lot of competitive card games over the past 15 years or so. Um, and although Disney seems to be pushing this game to be more casual, at least at the start, it is. There's no denying that it is going to spawn a competitive nature in people, especially people who already play a lot of card games. Um, so it has done the same in me. I feel like I'm fairly competitive naturally, and I'm taking to this game very well. So um, I plan to be uploading semi-regular content. Um, if you enjoy any of the content or you have any tips for me or any suggestions, please just leave them in the comments. Let me know. Um, but anyway, yeah, let's get into it. Today, I'm just going to showcase the first deck that I'm going to be playing. This is the deck that I am playing in real life at the moment. Seems to be treating me really well so far. But again, if you have any variations or suggestions that you might want to throw my way, please be sure to let me know. And if you have any questions for any reason, I would be happy to answer them. So to start with, it is the kind of the quote-unquote best deck, as people are starting to call it online. It is the Amethyst Ruby Control Deck. I am partial to control decks personally. I like their playstyle a bit more. It's a bit more entertaining to me, but also tends to be a bit more rewarding to the skilled players, as in that it rewards your resources, managing your resources properly. Not to say that aggro decks don't take a certain level of skill, but it tends to feel better for me if I win with control deck versus if I win with an aggro deck. That said, there are some very strong aggro decks in the meta. They are very relevant, and you need to be aware of those threats. And I've tried to build this deck to, at least in part, kind of play with those decks in mind. So we'll start off. We're playing two of the Shield of Valor. It is, didn't mean to remove it there. Shield of Virtue, excuse me. This card's really strong. I will go ahead and say that I am only playing the two of each of the item cards. My, I guess, kind of thought process here is that items are incredibly powerful. They stick on the board for a long time. Really, the only removal for them is in silver, in Break, the action card, and in the Beast. And so you don't often see them removed. But purple does have Befuddle, which can return them to your hand. But you will probably inevitably play them again. In most of the control decks, it's really easy to get these down early because you don't want to be playing them later. You want to be playing them early to get value out of them over a longer period of time. However, all of the items in this deck, with the exception of the mirror, are inkable, which is really good. And Shield of Virtue is very strong, allowing you to ready chosen characters at the cost of 3 of your ink. Is really strong, specifically in conjunction with the 7-drop Aladdin. This card can be really strong because Aladdin can offer huge tempo shifts in terms of the lore count. 4 total lore difference for each character that the Aladdin can banish, and Shield of Virtue allows the Aladdin to effectively attack twice. Especially in the control mirror, this can be very strong, as the super late game control mirrors tend to whittle down to very few lore points in difference. And if you can get 1 or 2 Aladdin swings in between all of the removal spells that each other will be trading, this becomes very strong. So Shield of Virtue, very, very good. At the worst, it's an ink. So, next we're playing 2 Gaston. Gaston is one of my least favorite cards in the deck, but I will tell you why it's necessary. I don't like cards that can't generate you lore. However, this deck is kind of unique in that it is focused almost solely on removal, and because of that, you can effectively see Gaston as a form of 4 damage removal. One of the main targets for Gaston is Cusco, because the green decks tend to give you a little bit of trouble with Cusco because he has Ward, and there is a lot of targeted removal in this deck. Gaston can, to a certain extent, mitigate that because he has 4 power, and so that's going to get through Cusco's 4 toughness without really losing any value there. You don't want to be trading multiple things into Cusco if you can avoid it, but you also don't want to be playing your large board clears into Cusco either, because it seems like you're losing a lot of value that way. So Gaston and Maui, which we'll talk about later, both kind of effectively serve that role to get rid of pesky 4 health characters. Not just Cusco, but others as well. So then we're going into Aladdin as our next red card. This is the 3-drop Aladdin Street Rat. Another inkable card. Building a deck, I really value cards that are inkable, and I try to play very few cards that aren't, if possible. Some cards are too strong to not play them. However, Aladdin being inkable is really good. You primarily play him to shift into the later Aladdin that I mentioned earlier. However, sometimes one lore can definitely make a difference, especially playing multiple Aladdins throughout a game. If each of them is able to reduce your opponent's lore count, let's say you play 3 in a game, that's pretty big. 3 lore, it makes all the difference. You only need really 1 lore to win if it's 19 to 19. So every 1 lore that you can dock from the opposing player's count is very strong. Next up for red cards, we've got Dragonfire. Not a lot to say about this card. Banished chosen character. One of the simplest cards in the game, but one of the most effective. It is not inkable, however, you would almost never want to ink this anyway. In this deck, you're valuing a lot of your removal spells highly, and so you really want to make them all count. You will almost never use this on super low-cost characters. You'll play it primarily towards the mid and late game. In the control mirrors, you have to be very sparing with how you use this card, because it is exceptionally powerful, but you really want to use it on the most valuable targets, especially if you're playing in the Amethyst Ruby mirror match. Knowing when to use your Dragonfires and when to use your Maleficents and things is very important, and kind of the key to that battle of resources that I mentioned earlier. So, but very strong card, nevertheless. Next up, we've got Maui. So I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about Gaston. Another inkable card, which is huge. Again, I don't really like cards that don't generate you lore. However, Maui having 6 power is incredibly valuable. He's another card that can take out opposing Cuscos in one shot. A pretty significant threat that I've noticed he can deal with is the blue Hades, the legendary Hades. Has 6 health. But also just any troublesome characters. It can take out opposing Maleficents if they're exerted. It can take out Elsa, the legendary 8-drop Elsas. It's just a very strong form of removal, which is effectively what you see these Reckless cards as, is just removal spells. But being inkable and having that 6 power with its rush is very relevant. And I don't think it's necessary to play more than 2 copies. I haven't really missed it playing any more or less. It seems strong, but not strong enough that I would really cut anything else in the deck for it. I will talk at the end about like the few cards that I've kind of seen as like flex spots that you could maybe change cards out for. And again, just to reiterate from the beginning, if you have any suggestions, please let me know. Moving on to 7-drop Aladdin. Again, not really a whole lot to say about this guy. If I can find him. There he is. Very strong. You a lot of times will shift him in on the small Aladdin. However, if you're playing against other control decks or maybe mid-range decks with some form of small removal, especially steel will tend to remove your small Aladdins with fire the cannons and smash before you can shift in. So you will sometimes play him for his full cost of 7. But again, inkable, so at the worst case, he's an ink there. But his ability to swing lore in your favor is massive. This is one of the best tempo cards in the game. Any red deck should definitely be playing at least the large Aladdin, probably the small one as well, just because of the ability to shift in. And like I said near the beginning, Shield of Virtue makes this card even stronger. Shield of Virtue is very powerful in and of its own right, but especially with this Aladdin, shifting in and allowing you to hit 2 things in the later stages of the game is very, very powerful. But even if you only get through with 1, it is still a huge tempo swing. Them losing 2 lore and you gaining 2 lore is massive. So would not cut this card. Incredible. Be prepared. It's probably the one card I won't talk a lot about. It's just a board clear. It's one of the meta-defining cards currently. I would be surprised if I saw a red deck that wasn't playing it. Really nothing else to say. It's incredibly strong. Mickey BLT. Okay, this card is a little bit of a controversy. So it's very strong, obviously. Evasive, granting you 4 lore is huge. This will almost never live. In the control mirrors, they will kill this instantly. And in the aggro decks, it's a bit too slow. You want to be playing out your heavy removal cards in the later stages of the game to make sure that you kind of put the cherry on top of the sundae against the aggro decks. It's basically going to be an ink in a lot of those scenarios. However, it is one of your only ways to combat evasive if you do not have removal for those cards. 4 lore can be huge. This is one of the cards I'll talk about towards the end of the video, but this is one of the cards that I've considered cutting from the list. While it is very strong, in most scenarios that I've been able to play it, I would have rathered it be something else. But there is no denying that an evasive unit that gives you 4 lore is good. So we'll just have to wait and see kind of where the meta goes to see if it really finds its place. At the moment, it's one of the weaker cards in the deck, but I have been liking it. Maleficent, another card you really don't need to talk a lot about. It's Dragonfire with a body attached. 7/5 stat line for 9 is honestly not that great with the 2 lore, but killing anything in the game on top of those stats and the lore drop is very strong. It's another staple 4 of removal. My friends and I have all pretty much unanimously agreed that Maleficent not getting an enchanted rare was kind of a crime. So that is it for the red cards I play. I have considered copies of Pongo and copies of Goofy, but I really don't think that they make the cut just due to the amount of removal that you have. The only other red card that I've really considered was Fan the Flames. This is an option to play against Shield of Virtue. The one advantage to Fan the Flames is you can play it on a dime. It doesn't succumb to the silver removal that Shield of Virtue has, and you don't have to pay 3 to use its effect. However, Shield of Virtue, being able to have the longevity of multiple uses, as well as being able to be played on turn 1 and not have to dedicate the ink to it later, is very strong. And I think you could probably change it out. Like if you wanted to play Fan the Flames over Shield, it's better in a pinch, but not better in terms of value. And that's really what you're going for in the long control decks is value over time. And I think that the Shield exemplifies that more than Fan the Flames does. So personal opinion, but again, looking for suggestions. So let's move on to the purple cards here. Befuddle is our first one. I am a huge fan of Befuddle. This is a card I kind of want to up the numbers on. Um, it's very strong against the super aggressive decks. Um, a lot of times, if you don't see the shield in your opening hand, Befuddle is a great alternative because a lot of decks will play a one drop, specifically against the aggro decks, the yellow aggro decks in particular, and sometimes the purple. They will play down the Lilos or the Maleficents that can tap for 2 lore. Really good to remove those with Befuddle. It may not seem like you're getting a lot of value out of it, but keeping them a turn behind is the difference between 2 to 4 lore. So playing a Befuddle is effectively putting them a turn back in terms of how much lore they can gain. Specifically, the like Lilo into Simba or the Maleficent into Simba combos are very, very strong. Befuddle can not only help you push the turn 1 plays back, but can also put the bodyguard Simbas back, which is really, really huge. Especially when we get to talking about another card later. Combos with Befuddle are very, very good. Alright, so let's talk about the next card, which is the 2-drop Dr. Facilier. So we are playing the 7-drop Dr. Facilier next to it, which is very powerful. You want to play one of the smaller ones so that you can get a good shift in. In terms of the 3-cost Dr. Facilier right here, I don't see this card being super powerful. It's got an okay stat line. Its effect revolves around when you play songs. That isn't going to come up a whole lot. There are instances in where it might come up, but it is, I think, much more valuable to have the effective 2-drop of Dr. Facilier here, especially since the stat line for this card is Premier when attacking. Now, on the defense, it is obviously not as strong. However, attacking it trades incredibly favorably. You can get a lot of value out of this card. Oftentimes, when I have this card, I will be banishing 2 characters with it, or at the very least, I'll be shifting it into the 7-drop Dr. Facilier, which is also very strong. We'll come back to the 7-drop here. Let's move to the Broom. So brooms, a lot of talk about brooms right now. Basically, there's there's maybe 2, but one primary reason that you play brooms is to mitigate the mill decks. There is a very real threat of mill decks at the moment. Been seeing a lot of them on Pixelborn, but I do know a couple of people in my local area that are also playing around with the mill decks, and they are a very real threat. A lot of the aggressive decks can tend to tempo through them, but the control decks tend to have a rough time with it. They tend to make you lose a lot of your heavy control pieces, and if you're not prepared, if you don't have any answer for getting cards back into your deck, or you aren't able to be aggressive enough to outrace their lore count, then they can and usually will beat you. Control decks really rely on long games with value engines, and the mill decks play the whole new world, and they turbo through the decks really fast, and they make you lose a lot of that value. And you don't really want to draw cards against the mill decks because it'll just make you mill faster. However, if you play the Magic Broom, it does mitigate that milling, because each time you play a broom, you can use it to put another broom back into your deck. If you can effectively play 3 or 4 brooms without drawing a lot of other cards with your effects, you can usually beat the mill decks because they will mill out first. Now, I will also say this is very effective in the control mirrors. Very long control games can go to deck out, or very close to deck out, and even if you don't quite deck out, they will give you an advantage in terms of how many of your removal sources you have available to you. So having an extra copy of Dragonfire or an extra Elsa or something in your deck could be the difference between you winning or losing the control game. And this card has been insanely valuable in that aspect. So this is another one of those cards where it's kind of on the fence, but it's been very good in the control mirrors, and it's also been very good against the few mill decks that I have played against, and I think it's quite powerful. I don't really think it's worth playing the Mickey Mouse, at least in this version of the deck. I'm not sure Mickey really has a place because you're not really attempting to get those brooms in your hand. You want them in the discard so that you can loop them through your deck. That said, you can essentially play them from your hand to loop other cards into your deck if you're using the Mickey, but that kind of dedicates another card in the deck to playing the Mickey, and I'm not so sure I want to do that. So to be honest, I haven't given it a whole lot of testing, but I don't personally think Mickey finds a spot in this list. Magic Mirror. This is basically an auto-include in my eyes. Any pseudo-infinite draw engine, no matter how expensive, is probably worth playing in a value deck. Playing a control deck like this, you value card draw very highly, and I think you value card draw highly in general in most card games, especially in Lorcana, where it's very seldom that card draw exists. A lot of the draw cards in the game are very costly, with the exception of Friends of the Other Side, but that's kind of unique to purple. But most of the draw cards are very few and far between and quite powerful, and usually included in most of the decks. Purple's having access to effectively a Pot of Greed, for you Yu-Gi-Oh players who know what that does, is very, very strong in and of itself. Magic Mirror effectively can draw you your entire deck if you allow it to. Especially in control games, I've had this draw me upwards of like 12 to 15 cards in a game, which is just really, really effective. You want to have a lot of card advantage on your opponent. In the aggro decks, it's a little less valuable because a lot of times you'll be using your cards for removal. But if you make it to the mid to late game against the aggro decks, they usually start to peter out. They don't have as much card draw as you, and if you're able to effectively remove their early game, Magic Mirror just kind of skyrockets you into the late game, make sure your hand stays full and you have a lot of answers to those cards that they play. So it's very good at closing out games against the aggro decks, and very good at ensuring your victory against the other mid-range and control decks. So I think it's auto-include. Currently playing 2, I tend to see it fairly regularly. There's a lot of other card draw tools in the deck, so I don't see the need to bump it to 4. I might knock it up to 3. It's one of the cards I'm considering increasing numbers, kind of like Befuddle, but we'll get on into that later. Next card is Elsa. I'm referring to the 3-drop Elsa Snow Queen. Card's very good. It's similar to the Aladdin in that it's an inkable 3-drop. It has a better stat line than Aladdin. It doesn't have an immediate effect like Aladdin does, but it has a very powerful effect over time. If your opponent is unable to deal with this, it can provide a lot of favorable trades for you. A lot of characters don't tend to be exerted the turn that they're played, and an ability to exert any opponent's character provides a lot of utility for you if you have previous characters already on the board, or if you have a character we'll talk about later that gives you kind of quick access to taking things out. Specifically against the green cards I was referring to earlier, like Cusco and even Mad Hatter, Elsa can be strong against Mad Hatter. It can't hit Cusco, but it does give you favorable trades towards a lot of the cards. And not only that, but it allows you to shift into Spirit of Winter later in the game, which is also very strong. And once again, it is inkable, so it's very good. Friends from the Other Side. Kind of like Be Prepared, not much to talk about. It says draw 2 cards. Usually you will sing this with a 3 cost, but even if you have to pay 3 for it, it's still a card advantage, and you always value that. Being able to churn through your deck to find more of your answers is very good. So, Maleficent. This is not the biding her time. This is the sorceress Maleficent. Draw a card on play. Not really much to say. She replaces herself. She's inkable. I almost never want to ink this card, just because it's a body that replaces itself. However, sometimes it is necessary. If you have something else you really want to play, and you need that extra ink, you will ink this if you have to. But a lot of times I would much rather ink, say, an Aladdin to play this card on 3, just because it generates me that extra card. But it is very good. So four of that for sure. Okay, this is probably one of my favorite cards currently in the game, and that is Rafiki, Mysterious Sage. So it is not inkable, and it only provides you 1 lore. These are 2 things I do not enjoy usually. However, this is one of the most fantastic control tools in the game. It is incredibly efficient at dealing with a lot of the early to mid game threats. 3 is kind of the magic number, at least as far as we could tell in this early stages of the game, in terms of health. And being a 3/3 with Rush is incredibly strong. This card effectively serves as your early to mid game removal. This is the one card that I am almost certain that I want to increase the numbers on. And it also has probably my favorite artwork in the entire set. It's just, I don't know, they didn't have to make Rafiki look that cool, but they did. And so I can't value this card any higher. Currently I'm only playing 2, but I think if I do make any changes to the deck, this will be the first card to get a number increase. Card's incredibly strong. Alright, getting close to the end here. We're going to talk about White Rabbit's Pocket Watch. Giving anything Rush is really good. Again, it is an inkable item if you need to use that early or late. Establishing this early against the other mid-range and control decks is incredibly strong. It gives you super efficient utility. It basically turns anything in your deck into a Rafiki for 1 extra ink, which is super powerful. It is not the most... how should I say? It's not the most important card in the deck. It is very useful at times, but it's a little niche, especially against the other control decks. This is not very valuable, so it's just ink in those cases. But in the instances where it comes up, it is very strong, and it does help you a lot against the aggro decks, being able to clear their mid game characters as well as their late game characters. Like I said, a lot of aggro decks will peter out towards the end of the game. However, they can top deck very strong units that if you aren't able to get rid of after the first turn can end up kind of spiraling them to victory. Sometimes this will help with that. Again, not my favorite card. I don't think it's the strongest card in the deck, but it is very useful. Alright, let's see. Jafar. Incredible mid-game tool here. A lot of times Jafar will come down with between 4 and 6 power, which is incredible. Stat line, I mean, if you have 5 cards in your hand and you play this card, it's a 4 mana 4/5 that gives you 2 lore, and it's going to be a 4 mana 5/5 that gives you 2 lore on the next turn after you draw. Really absurd stat line most of the time when you play it. In the super early game, it's probably ink, and in the super late game, it's probably ink. But in those middle turns, from basically 4 to 7, I'd say, this card is extremely powerful, and you'll usually want to play it on 4, as long as you don't have another threat that you're attempting to deal with at that point that is more important than getting this down. But usually this will trade super efficiently into a lot of units. It's really only good in those few turns from about 4 to 7, which is why I have it at 2 right now. But in those turns, if you see it, it's very strong, and if you don't, if you see it in the early or late game turns, like I said, just ink it there. All right, large Dr. Facilier. Card's very good if you shift it in on the 2-drop. That's obviously incredibly efficient. 3 lore that turn is very good. However, I find myself not wanting to quest with this card unless I am very confident that my opponent cannot remove it. Its effect is incredibly strong and allows you to make absurdly valuable trades with your opponent. I love using this with Rafiki, being able to trade my Rafiki into an opposing 3 health character only to have my Rafiki return to my hand. I have had turns where I've played the Rush Rafiki 2 times because of Dr. Facilier, which is incredibly strong. I think this card is very, very good, but it is, in terms of the top end, probably one of the weaker cards. I would say it's better than Mickey BLT in terms of value that you get in a control deck, but it's probably worse than Elsa and Maleficent. The last card we're talking about is, of course, the infamous Elsa Spirit of Winter. There's an argument to be made for this being the best card in the deck. One of the best cards in the current metagame, I think. Even if you pay its full cost, 4/6 with a 3 lore count that can basically suspend 2 characters for a turn is absurd. It's very, very, very powerful. This gives you incredibly favorable trades into opposing characters that usually would not be exerted. It gives you guaranteed lore if your opponent can't remove it. It's just very, very powerful. 6 health is very difficult to remove for a lot of decks. If you're not playing against an opposing red deck, then they're probably going to have a rough time removing this. Blue does have removal that can place it into your inkwell, but you know, I mean, they can use that on that could happen to anything. So if you are playing against like silver, for example, or amber, then you have a very, very powerful and difficult to remove card that is also granting you an effect when you play it. The value of on-play effects in this game, I feel like, is very, very strong, because if you look at a lot of the cards, there actually aren't that many on-play effects, period, and if there are, they're usually fairly subpar. They're not very strong, very minimal. This is a card with a great stat line, with a good lore count, that has an extremely powerful effect. I don't know if I would want to play 4 simply because it is not inkable and you do not want to draw it in the early and mid game. However, in the latter stages of the game, especially in the control mirrors, this card is invaluable. And yeah, so that is my deck list currently for the Amethyst Ruby control deck that I'm playing. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. If you'd want to give it a like and give it a share, let other people have the opportunity to take a look at it, that'd be really awesome. And again, any questions, concerns, any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Send me a message. Just let me know what you think. Really eager to be playing with a lot of my friends and a lot of other local players, getting to know people. I think this game is going to reach a super wide audience because of the IP. I really hope it does, and I can't wait for a more competitive nature to the game to kind of come to fruition. So appreciate it, guys. We'll have some more uploads later, I hope, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks.